there I am looking for the button for muting, and apparently I've already got this muted. So I was, so good. So we've got this live streamed at the following link. If people want to track it there too, that would probably help Google's algorithm know that people are interested in this content. Um, and there's chat. Cool. Oh yeah, so people who have at least one tip or trick, could you folks, I don't know, raise your hand or something? Because I would love to have uh content not all from me. I'm using this as a forcing function because I really want to be good at using um, these AIs for doing programming in Q, KDB plus / Q, and mute the tab there too. There we are. So where are we in terms of time? We're only 3 minutes in, and we've got how many people do we have? Or where's the number? Oh, right. So now do we have tomorrow's guest? I'm sorry, next week's guest. Let me nag him for a sec. Let him know that he should jump in and talk about next week's meeting, which I'm very excited about. Where is Justin? Great. So who has at least a little bit of experience with Copilot and might be willing to do a little talking too? Raise your virtual hands. Someone said he uses it on his work laptop. Well, while we're waiting for Justin, I'm going to take a moment to read Justin's promo for next week. Your events. Um, so this seems like a whole bunch of really cool tools for doing content development. That he has I believe open sourced. And so you'll get to see what's cool about them next week at the same time.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh yeah, talk.
Oh,
That's great. Why don't you talk about it?
yeah. Sorry, yeah, I'm just having lunch in Cleveland with my kids. So, yeah, next week, what I want to do is go through some of the various ways to upload and manage data in ChatGPT. So, we'll go through basically kind of like the difference between a single shot prompt, talk about like custom GPTs, which offer real quick RAG models. And that's good for the non developers. We'll talk about how to structure some data. And then we'll get into the fun where we'll actually work into the open API spec. I have a couple projects that people can use as examples, basically creating the uh, OpenAI assistant from scratch, basically setting up a bunch of data, working with the APIs to create the assistant, then load the data, create a vector store, and we'll work on a little bit of prompting so that way your data gets pulled in appropriately. And it's a kind of a model that you can use to hook into any application you wanted to do, like a RAG architecture for.
Nice. Thanks for coming in to do that. Coming attractions. I think that's something we should try to always do. So if you're whenever you're speaking, try to come at the beginning of this previous meeting so people get a sense of what's coming up. I'm totally excited. Um,
Yeah. I'm pumped too. I got to get back to lunch with the kids, but I look
Enjoy
forward
the
to seeing
kids.
everyone next week. See y'all.
Move spotlight. There we go. And okay, so I would love to make this quite interactive. If people can jump in with things that they've learned and figured out or suspect or whatever. Oh, you know what? Just to be on the safe side, I'm gonna also do a record to the cloud. Right, cool. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what I found myself thinking about as I was preparing this talk was imagine you were working with a smart fourth grader who didn't already know, let's say, the programming language that you're using. Um, what what would you really want to do to equip that person to really program effectively using a GitHub Copilot? And I like this thought experiment because lots of domain experts may be essentially somewhat like a smart fourth grader. They don't really know much about coding, but they probably know or could be told what a CSV file is. And if you gave them enough background, we could get a lot of the same benefits that we got through two related, from my point of view, related big uh, um, big advances. Formula translation, right? That, you know, when Fortran came out, people stopped having to think about registers and like, oh, I have to load things into registers in order to compute a formula. And then, of course, with the
两
advent
分
of
钟已经很烫
spreadsheets,
了。
oh, someone is probably doesn't mean to have their um uh if you're not actually
我
trying
好
to
想去拜一个
please
泰国菜
mute unless
师
you
傅。
mean to be
我
speaking.
觉得什么东西加上这个 curry sauce 都好好吃哦。
I probably ought to have someone else um cancel. How to there's probably some kind of mute all button that mutes everybody but me. Um what is there something like that? Mute. Why don't I see a mute button for this person?
I think she
Um
muted herself. She figured
okay.
it out.
Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. I guess when the person's muted, they hide the mute button. Okay, that just to confuse me. Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, I think that a lot of the wonderful benefits we saw with spreadsheets, where, you know, people who know a field can do their own computing. We're going to be able to see a lot of that. I'm here to show slides from the current one. Um, so I recommend people do the kind of exploration I just did, picking a language that the large language model. Oh, I put an extra character there. LLM, not LLVM. That's a different technology. Um, and build something in a very iterative way. Get good at keeping track of the changes. Now, I did this in a very particular way. I'd love to get people's thoughts about it. What I did was ask um, the LLM to generate the function that I'm working on completely again with some changes. I pasted it in, and then I used git diff to see exactly what changes it was producing and proofreading that that's actually what I wanted. And then I actually would commit that with a comment, and which means I probably have more commits than a lot of people think is a good idea, but I like it. Um, Oh, does anybody have a comment about that? I heard it. I heard a sound. Oh, I guess not. Um, and I do suggest that this that what we've been seeing in our previous meetings with Llewellyn, that doing things in a highly test-driven way sounds great. Given that my goal is to do that in Q, not in Python, I won't be demonstrating anything like that. But you can go back to our earlier um, streams to see Llewellyn walk us through that kind of thing. So one of the things I think is an interesting opportunity, besides, of course, actually building something you care about, is to use this technology as a way to learn a programming language that you're not already familiar with, and in particular, to learn it in the way that's relevant to you. So like there's all kinds of packages in Python. There's packages for seismology, right? All kinds of things I don't need to know anything about because I don't have any seismology clients. So, but having it work with me to build the kind of thing I actually build, helps me to learn the ecosystem, that's relevant for me. So some of the features that people may or may not be familiar with, let's kind of go through some of these relatively quickly. Um, I'm going to focus in today's talk on using the chat feature where you get to have a conversation and really, and then I can just, copy the function that it writes into the code. But here's some things some features that were around before that chat got added. Okay, so this kind of ghost text capability, right, where you see kind of in gray. Is this visible? Can people tell me how visible this is?
Looks great.
Okay. So the idea here is, when you see this kind of ghost text, there's a couple of things that are interesting. Obviously, if you actually click a tab, then it gets inserted into but other things that are you can also, in my case with a Mac, use command right arrow to take parts of it and left arrow to get rid of parts of it. Sometimes you will see that you get, several possible choices. And I'm not seeing that here. Oh yeah, here it is. One of two, right? So you can go back and forth and look at different possible completions. Um, and what other pieces here? So there's this kind of ghost text, but then there's also um ghosting based on based on a comment, right? So if I say in the comment in whatever language,
You. Hmm.
pardon? Okay, I guess that wasn't the question. But the idea here is if uh so you can um oh, uh you can be putting in a comment, and I guess the idea is you're always supposed to be looking out for these stars, because often there'll be an interesting menu of options. Not that I'm getting one in this case, but that's one of the things. Um, so you can dismiss the ghost text with escape if you don't like what it's coming up with. Um, and Oh, then there's this control, or in the case of the Mac, command enter, where, let me see, let's try this command enter here, where it's supposed to open a window, command enter. I just saw this documented. Command enter. Okay, that's one I I don't see how that works. If someone else can demonstrate the command enter, it's supposed to open up, I thought something on the right, that gives you yet more options. Now I am not a big fan of this control or command I capability, where you get this little command prompt here. And the thing that if someone else has it working better than I do, what I find is when I ask it to do something here, if I ask it to rewrite a function, changing this argument from this and that to that, whatever, I find that when I then do a get def, it it's no fun because it's like everything looks like it was deleted and replaced it with, I don't see that it was really only these two lines. So for me, this command I doesn't seem to be working great. So I'll show you in a little bit how well just using this chat feature over here works. When I just say, hey, rewrite the function for me, I paste it in, and then I can do the get diff and I see exactly what's changed. And it's like, that seems to be working great for me. If someone else can get the command I / control I feature to work, I'd love to see that demo. It doesn't work well for me, in part because I think of it as my job to be doing quality control. Do I think that this is the change I really wanted, right? And so I don't want to be reading more code than I possibly can. The other thing that I haven't played with as much, and because I'm really in love, maybe because I've been using ChatGPT for a year, and so this is comfortable for me, is this QA style, where you put in a comment in whatever the comment syntax is for the language, and you ask how does a hash table work, right? And then you just hit enter, and it gives you ghost text for now. I guess this is mostly interesting if I thought that I wanted to put this text in and actually make it part of the documentation for my system. Um, Angela, does anybody have a feeling that would be a good thing for someone to jump up? Like, when would you actually use this? Oh, interesting. I thought it was supposed to say, oh, I was supposed to say Q, and it was supposed to say A. Um, but anyway, does anybody have anything to say about like when is that feature like super useful? Does anyone want to jump up and make a comment about that?
I don't use it very much, but I have used it a little bit in my tests. If, for example, I'm testing an algorithm and I want a more, then I've used not very often.
Who is talking?
Sorry, this is Julius.
Julius. Okay. Yeah. So, but do you like have a use case that you would do you feel it really provided value?
Like I said, only for example, and this isn't a great example because I haven't done this one recently, but if you're writing, the tests around something, and it's important to you that it has maybe a performance characteristic that you're not capturing the tests, and so the algorithm matters and a little bit of an explanation, I might put that in the test because I'm a big fan of tests as documentation, as my primary documentation. But to be honest, usually I find that I'm better off just linking to, if it's an algorithm, an article somewhere that's maybe the definitive article. So I don't use it much, but I have used it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be a real fan of just having of what I can do here on the right. In this, I'm overjoyed that they have added that feature of having an actual chat capability here. And then they're pitching that things are very multilingual. I would love someone who who is multilingual to tell me how really good it is for other languages. And then the fix and explain feature where which probably might not be visible here. We should play around with these. If people have good things they want to say about these features, that would be cool. Okay. So what I'm going to do is go through a kind of an iterative process for creating something, mostly using the capabilities of the chat. And what I'm really trying, one of the things I'm trying to demonstrate is the number of ideas that like this hypothetical smart fourth grader really needs to have in order to do this kind of thing is actually like pretty small, right? And it probably, it could be made much smaller. But right now, given the kind of computing environment that we build things in mostly, this person really understanding, what is a CSV file? What is a config file? What is a function? I mean, there's some basic things the person needs to have. Maybe if they know how to program in some language, they can program kind of usefully in Python using these tools. And I assume other languages are going to get better over time. Okay, so here is my little toy example. So let's say I start by saying, write a Python function that logs the current date and time to a file called log.txt. Oh, right, there's a use of ghost text there. And now this all right, so here so someone would need to tell a beginner that Python has multiple versions, and so it's useful to actually call Python 3. What are we calling this program? So, and it's useful to have, so we're calling this the right log here. I probably should have called it something else because I've got an example too. Okay, so here we can see that it in fact did do that. So now what I'm doing is like committing all the time to make it really easy for me to see what's changing. So let me do it that way, but I'm interested in other people's um, processes. So then the next thing I did was so now I wanted to see, would it successfully rename, if I asked it to rename, would it rename both, both the call, and the first time I tried this, it didn't. Oh, this time it did. So I guess maybe it's because I told it regenerate the entire file. But now what did I do wrong here? Ooh. Oh, right. I'm not in the right file. I'm in okay. So, um, okay, so the next thing I wanted to do was log some kind of weather stuff. So I said, where can I get weather data from to include uh in this log file. So now here's a warning. I chatted with a friend who said, you're probably pretty silly if you don't use the National Weather Service. They don't even require you to have an API key. And it's obvious for North America. It's awesome data. But in this example, the smart fourth grader, it wouldn't necessarily know how to do that. Um, so the next thing I say here is that I want to log so I want to also log temp, pressure, humidity, and the output. Regenerate log my health. Oops. Oh, this is interesting. This time it's actually telling me, be careful, it's going to be Kelvin. It might have told me that the last time, but I missed it. And I was confused why the temperature was such a high number. Okay, so pardon me. So obviously this isn't actually going to work because it doesn't have the API key in there. So actually why don't I tell it that I do in fact have this config file. It should read the API key out of there. Now I'm going to show you the format of the config file here in this junk version of the config file. But these API keys, the ones in the real file, are real. So I thought better not to put them up on YouTube. Oh, right. So it is telling me that we do need to include more imports too. So it isn't just regenerating the function. Let's copy. So let's see if this actually works. Okay, so I probably should be looking at what has changed. Oh, this is untracked. That's a mistake. Okay, so line 28, we are seeing your city is not defined. Anybody know what I'm doing wrong? Well, line 16.
Yeah, it looks like it's just trying to interpolate that your city variable, but it's not.
Oh yeah, I didn't, I guess, oh right, so the way I did this the other time was by passing in a zip. So let's tell it thanks, to generate this.
I mean, in general, you should never compose your query parameters that way. You should make a dictionary and give it to, I don't know, there's an operation that will compose them for you and it'll do all the escaping. It's in URL parse.
Oh, you're saying, actually, would you put something like that into chat so I can, as I said, I'm a Q programmer. So it's not obvious to me if it's generating something bad.
It's not going to get you anything terrible right now, but if there are funny characters in your city name or something like that, you can have a problem. I'll see if I can dig up something.
Oh, okay, great. Zip code is from the config. What are we calling the config file? Is that what I called it? Zip code. Right, so it is being smart about telling me to add things to the config file. They happen to already be there because I did this example already. Um, and it's telling me what I should paste in. So yeah, so this is what I did in preparing for this experience. So maybe it makes sense for me to actually show what it ended up coming up with. And that would be good to kind of critique the code, see, what do we like about it? What do we not like about it? So that code is actually in here. So what I ended up doing was iteratively asking it to build something that asks me kind of how am I doing, defaulting to 5 out of 10 and putting a whole lot of parameters about weather and then also about air quality. It did get this wrong when I said to it this weird long thing that they sent me in my email that is supposed to be, what did they call it? They called it my confirmation code. It's big and long. Maybe it's my API key. And Copilot said, no, that's just a confirmation code. That's not your API key. But then when you actually went to the website for this, they generate a URL for you, and they put that same number that they sent you as your confirmation in as API key. So, it clearly, it's like ChatGPT. It gets shit wrong. But you can, for someone who I don't program on Python on a regular basis, I got it to do something that I thought was kind of cool. And then I ended up also asking it, now here I need to talk to someone who actually has a bit of statistics background to see how close to useful this was going to be. Oops. But to say, hey, what if I wanted to use regression to see, oh, is there something that correlates with my being healthier? Like, am I happier when it's humid or not humid or something like that? Um, so I think this is kind of wild, right? That someone who doesn't have a statistics background could knock up a program and then show it to a statistician and say, how close is this to what I actually should be using? Why or why not? What would have been a better statistical test to use? So yeah, so that I found that pretty exciting. Thoughts?
I have a comment. I like these demonstrations, but I feel like they're toy examples. And I gave up on Copilot when it was having trouble, maybe a year ago, almost, to understand the um, larger context of, say, 1,000-line program. And I noticed that it has difficulty understanding, especially when you've got maybe 3 different APIs and a database interface that's not maybe the most standardized of each. It will encounter some real contextual understanding difficulties. And not only that, but it doesn't seem, I mean, back when I tried it, it didn't seem to have the ability to go out and read documentation. So, for example, I wanted to change my Claude API call to an OpenRouter.ai, OpenAI API compatible call. And in order to do that, it had to understand the OpenRouter.ai API. And I gave it the URL where it was documented, and it, of course, couldn't read it then. I wonder if that's improved and how it does on these larger code files with lots of context.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would ask you is, do you treat seriously spreadsheets? I mean, there's like, I think tons of programs that used to require real programmers. People would write this stuff in whatever, Fortran, and being able to empower people to do things that would normally take up the time of real programmers. I think it's an accomplishment. I'm not saying it's useful for all programming purposes, although it'll be interesting how it improves over time. But I wouldn't like poo-poo the ability to help me. I mean, some of the little Z shell functions that I've had on ChatGPT write for me, they actually do save me some real time and reduce the complexity of my life. And since I don't like sitting around actually trying to write shell script myself, having something write them for me. Sure, they're context, very low context things. Copy from the download file, the most recent thing in my download into this directory. So I don't have to think about like what's the name of that file. I know I want it here. I know I want to add it to this repo. like there's tons of little utilities that does. I don't want to poo-poo that. Of course, it's not the building of seriously complex systems, but I think it's still a remarkable accomplishment. What are you thinking, Jim? Was it Jim who was talking?
Yes, and I'm absolutely not arguing that these aren't very useful, especially for learners learning a new language or beginners in programming generally. These are extremely important abilities that I have a great deal of appreciation for. But so when you see the GitHub press release saying that Copilot makes developers 88% more productive, that's from survey data. Well, I would like to see how, because most programmers, most developers are working on larger files with a lot of context, and they need it to be cognizant of the documentation, which is probably very easy to find, but back when I tried it a year ago, again, wasn't able to be read by Copilot. Is that still the case?
Great question. I'm assuming it still is, but yeah, I'm not. I don't know. I guess I would. Does anybody know whether the studies were actually done in more than just kind of self-report, and what kinds of problems they had
I need
people
to correct myself. It was 88% of developers claimed to be more productive with Copilot, and Copilot made them 55% faster and a 7% higher rate of completing the task. So I kind of misrepresented that survey, but I don't have that information, no.
I guess one thing is, it'd be interesting to know, like, I mean, yeah, look, I mean, I spend a lot of time, just I make a completely silly error, and if something's able to help me notice that that I've made a completely idiot error more quickly, then it could make me seriously more productive in a very easy way.
Well, so Eric, do we have anybody that's on this call who's used this Copilot a lot? Because I mean, I would have some questions for them about what they observe, but certainly
I
when you
thought
talk
Julius was saying that he uses it fairly regularly. Is that true, Julius?
I've used it a bit. I don't know that I'd say a lot. I definitely still consider myself new to GitHub Copilot, but I'm happy to share what I've seen.
Yeah, so I'm gonna answer a couple of things that Eric said, and then if you would then treat that as a question and sort of comment on it, that would be useful, because I have not used Copilot, but I have managed programmers, and sometimes people who are not familiar with stuff and are just poking around and trying to figure things out. And so I'm wondering if Copilot has this exact same problem. But I remember a situation where someone did not know how to access an XML file. And so they looked up online and got a little snippet that showed that it showed you opening the file, positioning the cursor, going and reading a particular cell, and then the answer. So they wrote a subroutine that took like the file name and the cell number that they wanted, and it would, every single time you asked it what the cell value was, it would open the file, parse the entire file, access that one cell, and then close the file. And then they put it in a loop. And it was slow, but functionally correct.
You think?
Functionally correct, and probably would have passed unit tests. So this is the kind of thing where, if it's one class of error that I would expect ChatGPT to make, and that might be really hard for somebody who's just learning a language to understand why that was kind of bad. Like if they had programmed in a couple of other languages and they were used to that as an efficiency thing, they would never make that mistake. But if, as you say, they're a domain expert and just trying to do something, I mean, I've seen people who are really happy with that kind of result because they run the program, they get the result, and they're all done. But there's a difference between that and production programming.
Right. And that's why I think one of the things I learned from this little experiment was the things that I'd want my smart fourth grader to know, right, are some, basic computer architecture kinds of ideas. Like what are these different kind of file formats? I mean, look, you joke about the case with the XML, but I think more than I have been on projects where people have built object stores on top of relational databases, and like they try to fault things in, and it becomes like just molasses. And trying to explain to people why that's not that's not the right way to use a relational database, and these were professional programmers who thought they were writing production code. But so I think one thing this does highlight is if the human understands certain elements of computer architecture, then they can maybe program in a language that they don't really know, because the syntax of, like, how do you open a file, how do you can be handled by the by the LLM. But you do need to supply kind of reality, right?
And you need to
you're still in charge of quality. Go ahead.
You need to have an understanding of like algorithmic complexity and big O notation and so on. That those are fairly fundamental big things that programmers want to come in doing, and that kind of distinguish a programmer from somebody who's just dabbling or something like that. But I'm curious what Julius has to say, because I see him nodding a lot politely. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so let me preface this a little bit. The state of the art here is moving fast, as I think all of us in this group know. So anything
Frozen.
The state of practice right now, I think, for tools like GitHub Copilot, the way I think of it is it's mostly a replacement for Stack Overflow, right? We all know those Stack Overflow different developers. That's the way that they write all their code. And mostly, I would say you'll get similar quality, right? You're sort of cobbling together mismatched pieces and such. So it's great for going from, where I can make it happen, even if it's remarkably inefficient. I think Eric, you were sort of mentioning you've seen examples of this. That same kind of mistake in professional situations. I won't share client names, and this was a long time ago, but Fortune 50 company trying to, this was code to sum up the cost of an invoice, right? So you've got SKUs, you've got a per SKU price, you've got a number of units, and you add those up. This isn't a remarkable complex. They were using effectively an early version of Enterprise Service Bus to reference databases all around the planet, making hundreds and hundreds of network calls, and just doing it like the least efficient way you could. I could not have designed a better way to do this slowly, right? It was taking minutes for something that should have taken nanoseconds to do, right? So it's not replacing higher level programming skills to make good code, or what I to do if they're past the intern level. And in many cases, it'll do below intern level things. So I think what it is doing is, for example, if I'm touching a technology I've never seen before and I don't know the ecosystem, it's great at like, oh, use this library, and I'll be like, oh, that's a real thing. Although sometimes it does find phantom libraries, and that's become a whole new attack vector, and syntax things and stuff like that. But I still very much need to think about the higher level problems, right? What's the performance characteristic? Is this, depending on your school of thought, is it following things like solid principles well? Things like that. It's not great at yet. There are people trying to solve this. I think CodeGraph is a great example of an org trying to really understand your code base and do this well. I haven't seen evidence that it's really working the way I'd like yet. But for getting that first draft of something that it's seen a lot, I'll see it'll sometimes write more efficient code than I do. Optimization. It's a little less readable than I'd probably like, but it's sort of jumping ahead a little bit. I don't know if that captures other people's
Actually,
experience.
Julius, if you just don't mind repeating your last couple of points, I turned off your video because we were losing a little bit. So if you
Oh,
could,
apologies. I'm working from an Airbnb because I'm traveling right now, so the internet's not as good as possible. I think the headlines are it's good at sort of replacing something like a Stack Overflow, right? Oh, I've got a trivia question. I've got a syntax question. I've got a how do I use this library question. Maybe even an algorithm that's well known. It tends to be pretty good at. But those higher level things that we care about as professional developers, it doesn't tend to do a great job. You can end up with a real hodgepodge of sort of Frankenstein code mismatched, lots of duplication, very different styles between things. So I'm not too worried today about it replacing my job or any of my friends' jobs anytime soon. This is a space that's moving really fast, and people like CodeGraph are tackling that exact problem. That's the whole point of what they're trying to do. SourceGraph is understand your whole code base, make things that fit in well, solve those higher level things.
actually, if you don't mind talking about what they're up to and what's promising and what's not promising about their approach.
SourceGraph, and I don't know the details very well. It didn't work well enough for me to go deeply into it. But my understanding is they're really about understanding, pulling your entire code base into that context window in a way that the LLM can understand it. That's my sort of elevator pitch for my understanding of what they're tackling. So there's people working on the higher level problems, but it doesn't seem like anybody's really nailed it or frankly come particularly close to nailing it yet. That said, computers get smart a lot faster than humans in my experience. So don't take that as a long-term statement. I'll give an expiry date of June. I feel safe as saying in June of 2024, that's the case. I'm not saying anything about July just now.
Nice. Rafi, did you want to say something?
I do. So I have no experience with Copilot. So I'm listening and I'm fascinated. I think we have to distinguish between being genuinely impressed with the progress that these technologies are doing, distinguish between that and considering it useful in my actual work. My actual work is the kind of programming where a lot of it is not even at the computer. A lot of it really is with pencil and paper and designing and engineering and reconfiguring and designing the data structures. And it's not anything that an example of code would help me with. It's something that is just my engineering effort. So I think we can agree on one hand that the development that's already been there is impressive. On the other hand, I think we all agree for that higher level engineering view, complexity aware, it's not ready yet. And so the question is, what it can put on the table, aside from being impressive, how actually useful it is. Now, Eric is positing that it would be useful to the learner. I'm not sure about that because I actually would like the learner to learn the rudiments of very, very basic things about these languages. Now, true, I can imagine a product manager who wants to create some code but is not really interested in programming, producing something that will satisfy their need fairly quickly. So there is that use. A learner who's actually thinking about being a programmer, no. I do think that we're not all the same as far as how much premium we put on something that will save us the rudimentary syntax errors and the like. I think Eric puts a higher premium on that because I think he maybe stumbles at that stage more than some other people, and he recognizes that, and he doesn't want to be stuck on that, and he finds that this helps. I make errors and I have to fix syntax errors and the like, but I'm perfectly happy to live with that, and I would not want to bother with something that will help me create the Z shell code or get the syntax in Go exactly right or whatever it is. So it's not to my taste, but I can see that it can be to someone else's taste who just simply doesn't want to get stuck over the trivia of getting the syntax right and pulling out some fairly standard kind of code that's available on the web, but not having to do the Google search in order to find it. It's already built into this Copilot assistant. So I can see why we might have different attitudes as to how this is useful and to whom it's exactly useful.
Yeah, can I build on that a little bit? I sometimes make a distinction. I'm sort of a career language designer, and I make a distinction between languages where you implement something in languages where you express something. And I think that the thing that you're talking about, the kinds of programs you're talking about writing are the ones where you really want to express something, not just get the answer, but have the representation feel good. And sort of a favorite story of mine was when really a lot of years ago, like probably back in the 1980s or something, I saw some talk by somebody who worked for Bitstream, which was a company that made fonts back then. And at the time, I had made some font, and fonts at that point were very low res, and you could sit around in a pixel editor, and you could say like, okay, I want my A to have a dot here, a dot here, a dot here, and so on. And like, I made my own little font, and it was really cool.
I've done that.
These guys are the guys that made them professionally. You know, they could like scale. They could go on PostScript printers, which is what we called them back then. But you know, they were scalable fonts and stuff. And the guy said, you know, I don't design letters. I design words. That what I want is for the words to look right when they're written down, and that's what dictates the implementation. Is that you're designing for the flow. And so I think of languages that way, that you're thinking, what sentences would I want to write? And how would I design a language which would support the writing of that thing? And I think programming is sort of in an intermediate space there, where often we're designing like domain-specific languages, or at least a set of vocabulary within a language that's going to work together in a certain way, such that if something is just coming in and saying, this is the way you do it, or something, and not really considering the context, you're not going to get the output you want. It might not be maintainable. It might not express the ideas in a way that lets you do that lets you grow like a bottom-up system, at least.
Well, there's a different aesthetic in play. So
yeah.
And the word cobbling together was used, and it's probably very appropriate. In other words, you're just looking locally and saying, this has to accomplish this right here, so let's get something that accomplishes that. And then next we need to accomplish that, let's get something that accomplishes that. Which is rather different than taking the higher level view of how do I want all this to hang together, and what do I think stylistically would be nice for the reader and maintainer to deal with. Many other higher level considerations that I don't think the technology is ready to do, and I'm less optimistic that it's going to get there very fast. I'm extremely impressed by how fast things are moving, no question about that. But I'm also very aware of the huge distance between what these things are doing and what professional programmers do.
I guess the point that
for some tasks that's not true, but for many tasks it is true that what the professional program is doing is not approached by anything that these assistants would help with, except really very, very locally. If you want it, fine. But I'm happy to go back and check the syntax.
I think that this, for me, this is akin to someone develops a new technology for surgery or something, and it may not be right away obvious what it's really good for.
Reasonable.
Like, so for example, one of the things that I was able to use, it wasn't Copilot, it was ChatGPT. But I wanted to be able to produce a large quantity of test data that met certain characteristics, so I could do some performance testing on it. I'm pretty sure I would have taken at least like a day.
That's a different kind of assistance. It's not the assistance with coding, but it can be significant assistance to the coder that it's doing that.
Well, what I'm saying is this test data, I would have written in this case Q code to develop this test data, but having it generate the code that wrote the test data, it was, especially because I wanted realistic names for things here, and I could say so writing test data, looking at things that I've written, and doing a first pass of documentation that I might want to clean up. But the first pass of the document, or maybe saying, I don't really need to document this because I know that my colleague will be able to use an AI to look at it and write and get the documentation dynamically. In other words, there's a lot of potential use cases that have nothing to do with this is as good a programmer as I am, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a very fair case. I think there are really separable tasks that are in the critical path that the programmer has to traverse. It's a separable task, expressible, well characterized, and it doesn't need to be stylistically integrated with anything else. It just needs to be accomplished. And if you
Similar to how you might
accomplished-
use a junior programmer on a project, right? You say, hey, give me a hand here. Can you write me a utility that will solve this problem for me? Come back when you have a first draft. I'll look over your shoulders, right? It's a little bit like a human in that way. It's not perfect.
Right. Although that's using a human junior programmer as kind of a mule, essentially, and not really guiding them towards ultimately being more than a junior programmer, I suppose. So it's great that you can get the software to do that instead of abusing a junior programmer to do it.
Dimitri, we haven't heard much from you. Did you want to make a point?
No, not I was just listening. Well, one point is I disagree with whoever mentioned that this thing is as good as Stack Overflow. I would say human specialists are more reliable. So I would actually rank Stack Overflow higher than this automated, especially because, quite frankly, I don't think the technology is not up to that level yet. So maybe some models are really, really great. You have to pay for them. 3.5, I could tell you some of my doodling around with 3.5 and the mistakes it made. So that's I would still trust actual human beings over there on Stack Overflow, except another thing I heard from a video blogger was that ChatGPT is very good at picking words. So at phrasing the questions, speaking the convincing language. So if you have an average Joe who has no idea, they hear from a human specialist, somebody who really knows what they're talking about, and they hear from ChatGPT. The language will be more convincing from ChatGPT. Yet it's going to be wrong. It has happened.
Yes,
Those things, this is one thing
a
they're
big
it's better than me.
hallucination problem.
Yes.
And I mean, the example I gave where it was very confident that the email that I was sent didn't include my API key, even though it was a big long string of stuff. And it was like, why would they be sending this to me if it wasn't the API key? But they didn't call it an API key, but it was convinced it wasn't the API key. And then when I went into the little URL builder on the pollution tracking site, they put that same thing in as my API key.
So it was not obvious to a human in
Pardon
that
me?
case. It was not in your face. Basically, it was not in your face obvious that, hey, there is the API key and it's telling you. It was not clear from looking at the email.
No, it was very unclear from the email that that the government website for pollution.
Oh, the website. Sorry.
It sent me an email and I was like, it said, this is your confirmation key. I was like, it seems like a lot. I mean, usually it's a 6-digit, like you know, I'm saying it's not, some people don't send on a GUID, right? Like, why would you? So I was like, well, I think this is probably my API key, right? Although it was right in saying, check your email, you'll get the API key from your email. It was just wrong when I told it, which I didn't know. It wasn't obvious to me where it was going to send me the API key.
Well, it
was helpful, even though it literally said something false. Go ahead, Rafi.
I would draw an analogy here. So I think we all realize that a large language model is particularly impressive with natural language. It's just amazing how much polish it has. And in that respect, it could really sell a good, make a good sales pitch for as if it knows something when it might not. That's extremely impressive.
Well, does it know anything at all? I mean,
I think it's not.
Unclear question.
Knowledge is emergent, and it's still bad.
My philosophy, I've philosophy of knowledge, philosophy of mind. I think that it is on the track of genuine knowledge. It's not just a party trick, although the knowledge is limited, but the track is correct. So it's not totally illusory that it knows something. It's not totally deceiving ourselves to think it knows anything. It's some kind of a prediction machine, but in the fact that it can make certain associations, it really is in the direction of genuine knowledge. But you have to be careful not to expect more of it than is really there, and it will get better. But here is a good analogy for what the hurdle is. You can learn arithmetic by looking at lots of examples, and that's really what these language models can do. They don't understand arithmetic. So they can't do arbitrary precision integer arithmetic that at some stage an elementary school student would be able to do at some stage, understanding the. It hasn't gotten to the point of understanding the rules here. It's just basically learned patterns within its domain of experience and not really extended that to. So what is the rule that would apply to the broad domain of infinite domain of integers? And so similarly, here we're looking at programming and we're expecting from it some kind of jump to a higher level understanding of what the intention is and how a large program is serving a certain purpose and different components interact in a certain way and interact over time in a certain way. There's so much complexity that as professional programs we have to deal with, which are really way beyond what it's doing. What it's doing is impressive, no question, but we mustn't underestimate how much more impressive it would be if it really could do what it is that we do kind of naturally and just thinking about that bigger picture. So there's a jump that it hasn't made. And if we think about how do we actually do in arithmetic on huge integers, we're using our neural nets to do that, but we're using our neural nets to invent microprocessors that actually do the calculation, and they pull it off, and we can indeed accomplish huge calculations. But that's after a significant evolution and going through interacting with the environment and producing hardware that will serve us in certain ways. And that's way beyond what you do just by a certain pattern recognition and being a prediction engine based on patterns, which neural nets are excellent at. So it's impressive what it does do, and one shouldn't expect necessarily that the hurdle that we're talking about now, it's multiple hurdles, are small. They're still big hurdles.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts come to mind with all this. I think you're all making some really good points. I think one of the things that surprised me is I grew up being a programmer since, practically as soon as I could write English, I was starting to write code on my Commodore PET, way back in the day, right? And it shocked me when I started coaching in some corporate IT worlds, just how, to me, simple a lot of the code that they were writing was, right? Take something from a database. These days we take something from a database, put it in a web page, go back the other direction. There are hundreds of thousands of developers that's their whole life.
Well,
right. And this is maybe a real, like that, these tools do a pretty darn good job at.
It could put them out of work.
And I've been saying for years, ever since I saw that first DHH video demoing Ruby on Rails, that first 7 or 8 minute Ruby on Rails video, I said, if all you know how to do is to take something out of a database and put it on a screen, you better start looking for another job. Right now, it took it a lot longer for it to start happening than I thought, but that I'll stand by that early prediction.
We might be there, yeah.
Very different worlds. The other thing that I'll say, and I think this is, I'm going to assume this whole crowd is, far to the right of the bell curve when it comes to developers and programmers and engineers in general. We're all here. There's a lot of indicators for that, and not just the conversation, just the fact that we're here. I think if you take a lot of, you're commenting about how it does great at writing English. If you take a great copywriter, right, that knows how to write great marketing material, they'll probably look at what comes out of these tools and say, wow, that's kind of, bozo material. Right? You didn't do this. You didn't do that. You didn't do this. What about this? What about some social proof? What about that? Right? I think if you took a literature professor, they'd probably tear it apart in different ways. I think if you took a best-selling author, a Stephen King, George R.R. Martin, whatever, choose whoever you love, a Brian Sanderson, they'd probably look at it and say, wow, that's a horrible story. But for me, as not a great writer, right? I'm not a professional writer. I'm maybe okay at marketing material, but not great. I look at it, I'm like, wow, that did a pretty good job. That's not maybe quite as good as I could do, but it was awful fast. And so I think we're seeing that same problem because of our specialization somewhat too.
Well, I've got a little bit of a data point on that, Julius. Did I interrupt you?
No, go ahead.
I actually did get to run this, some things I've done by someone who at least claims to have done copywriting for and marketing for like 6 extremely successful companies, one of which would have sold for over $1 billion, or would over $1 billion in 2024 dollars. And things like inventing domain names, like coming up with hundreds of possibilities, and to pick one out of, he was super impressed. Like Not that he would trust it to pick the domain name, but for it to generate like tons of options to pick from, that was seen by him as super impressive. The diversity of plus I think a lot of the times the kind of text I can get it to generate, I'm thinking mostly of ChatGPT here, is very different depending on how I ask the question. So, if I ask, tell me about the Arab-Israeli conflict, right? It's going to give me something that might sound a lot like, a seventh grader who spent a couple of weeks studying. But if I say, like, who are the most important writers who've talked about X? What books did they write? Outline chapter 3 in this book. I start to get stuff that I'm actually learning from. I don't know if in that particular example, I haven't done that particular example, but like it's, when I get it to summarize the work of an important thinker, it may be getting shit wrong, but it's still telling me things that are interesting to me to understand.
It has great sources to draw on. That's the kind of thing that, in fact, what the stuff that has been fed is just all ready to go almost. So it's just combining stuff. I think regarding looking at writing, it's somewhat like looking at programming. The more locally you look at what it's done, the more reasonable it seems. The more globally you look, or automatic writing of music, or like, the more locally you look at, if it's music, it can make some harmonic sense what the progression is. The more globally you look, the form doesn't make sense. It's not compelling. It's not. When you look at a bigger form, then more considerations come into play. Just as when you're looking at a bigger program, it's more than just getting some little algorithm right. It's really a combination of so many things. So depending on what we're putting the magnifying glass to, we can get different impressions as to how well it's doing. Locally, it could be doing spectacularly well. And I think there have been experiments that show that experts cannot discriminate necessarily between what it produces, and let's say at the paragraph level, and what a capable writer would produce at the paragraph level. It's really quite impressive that it can do that well. As you go to a higher level of form, a larger scale, its grade would go down. Similarly, even before, I don't know what technologies were used when MIT had this generator of scientific papers, which was really extremely amusing, which would generate just about anything. It would generate a paper would look absolutely like something you'd submit to a journal, with graphs and with bibliographies. Excellent bibliographies, and one of the authors could be Isaac Newton or whatever. You look a little more closely and you realize this is fake, but by golly, is it convincing externally, superficially. But it doesn't hang together quite properly. But if you just look locally, it looks quite professional and it's quite amazing that this is just automatically produced. So again, I think that just clarifies that depending on how we're inspecting and what we're demanding of it, the answer could be quite different. Is it doing a good job? Is it useful?
Well, if you think of it as a plagiarism engine, it has a lot more to plagiarize that's small than large.
Oh, absolutely.
As it gets bigger, the number of examples it can draw on to do something very large is fewer, and so
combine all these things. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I'm still reeling at the example from a week or two ago where somebody had the thing with the goat and the cabbage. Did we talk about this last week? I can't remember.
Oh yeah, it's a famous example.
They had asked a number of the GPT things like, I have a goat. I'm standing at a river. I want to get across it. There's a boat here. What do I do? And it said, take the goat across, leave it on the other side, come back, get the cabbage, and bring it over. And you could see right there that it wasn't understanding the problem, it was regurgitating the problem, and that there was this enormous bias towards the fact that there just happened to be a lot of cases of getting goats across the thing with cabbage. And so there's this extra thing. And I would expect that's like a tell that, it's just drawing on what's there. And so people are looking at this and saying, is this the beginning of a new kind of intelligence? And I'm thinking it's the end of it, because we're going to stop thinking. We're going to stop providing new input. There will only be all the other inputs that we've ever said. And now we'll ask it to do all future things based on I mean, what will it be plagiarizing? There will be no new things.
But you
So-
know, the way our mind works is we're plagiarizing all the time. It's just that we're doing a better job of it. I mean, you have two people that both seem to be able to talk about a subject, but one has learned the buzzwords and has seen enough examples of their use and spouts them out, and another one has a much deeper understanding of what really those buzzwords are about. But they're just on a spectrum. It's not like one is completely different from the other. The more we understand, the more we are able to relate things in ways that the superficial knower cannot relate. But they can maybe pitch a pretty good, pretty convincing shot at it. But as soon as you understand a little more, you realize, no, that's totally superficial. But it's not of a different kind, in my opinion. I think it's just a stage in the progression.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. I mean,
Right.
somebody in one of the previous talks, maybe it was Llewellyn, was saying that, it's useful to have it suggest renamings, but not to do the renaming. That like JetBrains is better at just doing the refactor once you tell it what you want to do the refactor, and maybe it'll get better integrated in the future or something like that. But there is some question as to whether or not the representational information necessary to do that refactor is really in there at all, and whether it will in the near term get better without like some really structural difference in how it does things, as opposed to just linking up to other tools and knowing when to call out because it just knows it's really bad at these things. I think human brains do have that information.
I think there's no problem. Like if I had the function, foo in the file and I say regenerate this file, naming foo to bar, but don't change it anywhere else in a comment or whatever. It's capable of doing that kind of stuff right now. That I think I can demo that to you. So it's able to know that only, the function definition and the calls to the function. But if that string exists inside a variable or a variable name is identical, don't change it. It can do that level of stuff now, at least for Python. I don't know that it can do it. I mean, Python is, I think, the one that they're most focused on in these
For
current.
code that it built for scratch, maybe he was saying that there's some code that it did not build and so could not rebuild. I don't know. That's
I mean, he's saying that, I think he was saying that the convenience of, he's got all of these refactoring tools, but I don't think that Llewellyn was saying that it won't work, or it won't work for at least, modest size files and stuff. But yeah, I think, like those tools have lots of refactorings. By the way, one thing I do want to point out, when many years ago, I was working at the company. I don't know if they had renamed themselves from IntelGenetics to IntelliCorp when I was at this point in history, but I did some consulting for a company that had done an expert system around wafer fabrication. And this must have been, and this is a lot of years ago. And they got it to the point where the human expert would say, we need to do one more test before it's ready to actually bake real chips. And the computer was saying, no, make these adjustments and start to really, put real product into the oven. And they got to the point where the humans were wrong, where you could really show that they'd gotten the expert system close enough that humans were being too conservative and wasting essentially time and energy doing more tests than they actually needed to. So yeah, these things are going to make mistakes, but humans make a lot of mistakes too. So it's not, we may be a little bit biased, right? I think in the direction of looking at our own, looking at where where these LLMs are skinning their knees and ignoring how often we're screwing up too.
Yeah, I want a word to use other than humanist, kind of like, when you're being too judgmental of something, of the computers, because you've got and you're not judging humans on the same scale, right? We see that all the time with this AI stuff, right? Oh, AI is learned by, stealing artists' work, looking at artists and copying what they did. Well, how does every artist in the world learn?
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Human
And I think we're seeing
chauvinism is
similar
there.
things, but yeah.
Yeah, this human chauvinism has to go.
Exactly. I don't know what the word for it. You can't use humanist. That's a totally different word, obviously, but there's some term there that we need to describe this bias towards human behavior being okay when it makes mistakes and computers don't.
Well,
Yeah,
I
but-
mean, I would disagree on that, but I'll write you a blog post on that because my answer to that won't be too long. But I don't think it's the same thing. I think that's a different problem.
I look
There
forward
are,
to reading it.
there are issues of scale and there are issues of replicability that are different in humans and in that, such that they're sort of incomparable entities. It's a tricky space.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited to read your article because that's exactly the point that seems interesting to me.
Mhm.
Okay, so we need to figure out how we're going to make sure that Kent, when you get me the article and I can post the pointer to it, in our meetup, so that anyone can track down your article, Kent.
Could
Well,
I
my saying it
suggest?
out loud means somebody has to pester me later to actually write it. So,
Okay, I can nag you on LinkedIn.
yeah.
Someone wanted to say something.
I'm going to try. I'm going to try to turn on my video briefly so you know I exist, but I'm going to turn it off because it often interferes with my bandwidth. I don't have a lot of upload bandwidth where I am. I want to suggest that there's a larger architectural issue about AI assisted work of any kind that we're probably able to generalize from at this point. What these systems can and cannot do bears a great deal on the economy of the future. Obviously, people aren't going to be hired to do the things that these systems are able to accomplish. But that doesn't mean that people aren't going to be hired. What we saw a year after the release of ChatGPT is that graphic design job demand increased while writing job demand decreased. And there weren't, according to the people who looked at the, I think it was Indeed, no, sorry, starts with an O, open work. Oh my gosh, what's the freelancing site?
Upwork?
Upwork, yes, that's right. The people who studied Upwork found that a year after ChatGPT's release, graphic design job demand increased, writing job demand decreased, and there wasn't a lot of change in other jobs. So if we can take that framework to think about what we are seeing these tools be able to do for us and what we see
I hope I
that
haven't
they,
confused everybody.
pardon me? In any case, I'm suggesting that if we look at what the tools can do and what they cannot do, we should be able to figure out what people need to work on, right? We should be able to make a curriculum for getting a good job in the AI-enabled programming marketplace. It'd be a very valuable course, right? Something everybody would want to know if they're just graduating college, for example. And that is something I think we should be doing. We should be focusing on seeing what people need to know in order to have the skills that will allow them to succeed in the context of these tools being pervasive and getting better over time. So I hope that's helpful.
I guess
you're
it raises
absolutely
the
right.
question for me, Jim. It raises the question. Oh, sorry, Rafa. I'll be brief. It raises the question for me, Jim, of like when they invented high-level languages, did we need fewer programmers? I mean, just because each programmer, when you don't have to load data into a register and then call an operator, like when you could do Fortran formula translation, when you can do, like, do you need, like, if this is a lot like high-level languages, that it allows a programmer to be more productive, it's kind of like, in the future, let's assume it'll be like having a pretty smart programmer who's better at certain things than you are and shittier at other things, but who together with you, you're better than either one of you would be. maybe people will just want us to write more software because it'll become more affordable. I don't know that it's not obvious to me that AI-enabled programming involves less programmers. It probably means there's going to be eventually a large class of programs that domain experts, like a statistician who's really good at stats and doesn't really understand databases, but I don't know, the thing helps him put the indexes in the right place, and he's able to muddle through and build something really, really quite powerful. But yeah, I don't know. My bias is to think that it's going to make domain knowledge more valuable. That really understanding domain stuff is going to be more valuable. But having an assistant that's good at a bunch of things, why would that necessarily mean we have fewer programmers? It's not obvious to me.
It shouldn't be obvious. What's obvious is that it changes the landscape. How exactly it changes is not so obvious. It wouldn't be obvious at this point. I mean, we saw the movie Hidden Figures, and there were human beings that were doing computations, which subsequently human beings no longer did, and maybe mostly no longer were able to do, which is amazing.
I was never able.
And that's true in many other domains. So the landscape absolutely changes. It's not clear that there's less work for everybody, but certainly there'll be less work in some fields, and people will need to migrate and learn new skills. And so predicting it is very hard to do. And yeah, we want to try to educate the next generation to something that will actually contribute to society. So we no longer put much emphasis on learning how to use a slide rule, for instance, which was certainly part of my education. Things absolutely will change.
Well, we're a little far afield from the Copilot thing, but I mean, as far as that kind of thing goes, I mean, the difficulty is that I don't think we'll be able to predict what things people have to learn, because as you say, the field is progressing quite rapidly, and it's hard to predict where it will progress, and where it won't. And the problem is that people pay really a lot of money to go to college, and they're saddled with debt, and they can't just move from one thing to another. And then the people who are losing the jobs are not necessarily the people that will get the jobs. And we have terrible social policy around all of this stuff. So like we really have not confronted the degree of just, disorientation and the need for not just training, but retraining, and the detachment of, I mean, in a sense, like one of the reasons why so much stuff became free, I think, on the internet. I mean, there's sort of a lot of different ways, and I'm not sure I'm totally happy with it. I think they promised us micropayments at the beginning, and then at some point there just wasn't. And I think the accounting of it is just too hard. Like there's too many things you have to do that are potentially useful to actually transact money at every single place that happens. But in society, when we move people around, we still bill them for the education, for a lot of other things, and our society it would move more smoothly perhaps if it would unsynchronize those things and not make it a like everything you do you have to pay for kind of thing. There's a lot that's set to be a mess right now because some things are moving fast and other things are moving slowly. So that I don't have the grandiose vision that some people have that it'll just be more jobs and different jobs. I don't think that's what's going to happen. It's going to be a bunch of people are unemployed. Some people are grabbing work that they think is going to be cool, and next year ChatGPT will just put them out of business again. So we'll see.
The transitions will not be perfect. We can guarantee that they will be very imperfect, and the timing is going to be off. And
actually, my terror level has gone down quite a bit because we're hearing about a continuous stream of layoffs. But if we look at those layoff numbers, they're less than, for example, Google. If Google wanted to lay off 5% of their lowest performers, for example, every year, the rate at which they've been laying off 100 or 300 per month, I think is well below 5% of their workforce. So over a year's time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems like we haven't seen the apocalypse that many predicted. So I'm not going with any opinion about whether or not programming jobs will get more or less. I don't even think the trend towards more graphic design and less writers is something that will continue. It probably will stabilize. Again, as the writers learn how to do prompt engineering and the graphic designers eventually get replaced by more and more capable AIs, there's probably going to be a stabilization. But I want to come back to my recommendation that we need to have some kind of a systematic evaluation of how these jobs are going to change demand for workers doing programming. Does anybody see problems with that as a short-term goal for making really good instructional content?
Seems like a reasonable recommendation.
I hit up against that problem all the time, just in the corporate world, where I do most of my coaching, most of my consulting work, right? They're always looking for how do we judge our developers, and they haven't figured it out with humans. So I'm a little nervous about thinking we're suddenly going to figure it out with, how do we evaluate an automated programmer?
Right. You have to characterize all the different kinds and flavors of work that different programmers in different fields and different levels within the hierarchy of the corporate hierarchy would be doing. Because it's not even just characterizing and categorizing the human flavors is something I don't think we've done. And some will be impacted in one way and others will be impacted in other ways.
One thing we've kind of, and I'm a big fan of listening to people who are smarter than me, and I suspect there's a lot of them in this meeting. But one person is definitely, I know, is much smarter than me, Andrew Ng. I think some AI people know him. I'm probably mispronouncing his last name. He makes the point that thinking about job replacement is the wrong way of thinking about these tools, right? It's too big, it's too broad, there's too much variety. And he cautions people to instead think about individual tasks. And I think we kind of hit on that in a couple of ways here. So yes, to take us back to our core topic for today, is GitHub Copilot going to replace developers? Probably isn't the question that he would guide us to ask. What he would guide us to ask is it going to solve this type of problem better? Are there pieces of the pie that it can attack and do much better than a human or better than the average human developer? And can we use that to overall improve the quality of whatever we're producing?
I think we're getting close to a good, with that comment, I think we're getting close to a good capping off point. I think that's a valuable way of looking at it, that we're going to find that this does change the economics of software development, and I think it will turn out that it's good for us to be good at it, to be playing with these tools. And even if we're only using them to generate documentation for something that we think it will do a good job for, or even we're only using them for, extremely confined tasks, I think it's going to be wise for us to do that. So I'll just cap off with a couple of quick points. So I think there will be ways for domain experts. I think it's probably already the case that domain experts can be coached to build things. I have a friend who does statistical work and who claims that the data cleanup, which has nothing to do with statistics, often takes many times longer than the actual data analysis. So would someone who doesn't enjoy and doesn't really spend that much time programming, but needs things that are going to notice bad data and help clean it up, this could make this person, I think it's a good example of something that could make that person being able to program out of the gate in a language I don't really know, even more impressive using an ecosystem I don't really know. But here I'm more nervous because it's likely to point me in the direction of maybe not the best choices. Oh yeah, this is fun. I'd like someone who has an actual statistics background to look at what it gave me here. So anybody who's interested, if they could hit me, that would be great. Yeah, I do want to say that I thought that the chat feature and pasting in what it gave you and then looking at it using git diff or some other diffy thing worked way better than the command I, control I capability. But maybe someone can show me that. if I let it just rewrite stuff, I don't really know what it's doing. I'm not in a good position to do quality assurance on what it is doing. Oh, this idea that if you're setting up like this smart fourth grader to muck around and begin building stuff, that maybe that you really want to set them up to be working in a container or something so that they don't get stuck because something doesn't build correctly because we don't have the right version of this package. And so if you set them up with an environment that's properly containerized, you might be able to keep them from getting stuck on stuff like that. So yeah, so I think what I'm learning is, even when I'm working with it to do something I think it's good at, I still have to do the QA. So I really want to make it very easy for me to see what changes it's recommending. And a lot of the time, it's very confident sounding and it's not, yeah, I think, okay. I think that's the last slide there. Anybody have anything they want to say before we end the meeting? Cool.
Thanks for putting this together. I was glad you actually filled out your talk. I was wondering if you had left out slides.
Oh yeah, I'll be improving them and I'll stick them somewhere for along with everybody else's slides from other presentations. Okay. Thanks, folks. Don't forget next week, I think it's going to be a very practical talk. Oh yeah, right. For people who may have come late, the next talk is going to be this harnessing AI assistance for dynamic content generation. It sounds like Justin has really put together a nice flow for being able to do a whole lot of blogging and stuff relatively quickly. So it sounds like he's introducing us to stuff that is, that he will be or has already open sourced. So it'll be a practical thing to learn his tool set.
Yeah, I've worked a little bit with Justin lately. In fact, we're working on a training course together right now, but his stuff is pretty amazing producing content. He's putting out a lot of content very quickly with it. So should be interesting.
Oh, nice. Okay, now you have me even more excited about next week. Okay, thanks, gentlefolk. See you then.
Thanks,
Ciao.
y'all. Have a good one.